Well, thanks again, gentlemen, for your insights and talks this morning. A couple great questions that folks have sent in. The first one being, why should we baptize our babies? But is there in the works a sweater vest dialogue on the Pedo Credo sacrament debate?
Well, there's something in the works, either that, but we'd like to do something bigger, more room,
like WWE style bigger, or?
We were scheduled to do Pedo Communion in March
of last year, right?
Last year.
That's right.
And then it looked
Something
like I
happened.
might not be able to get back out
That's right.
At that point in time. So that didn't fit with this trip, obviously. But yeah, we're
going to do it.
We're going to do it. We're planning. Apology is planning a church in Salt Lake.
Okay.
And so I'll be heading up that direction. Once you get to Salt Lake, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump.
Practically. That's right.
Practically.
All righty. So, question I think for you, Doug. How would you pick your battles with a wife who appears to demonstrate consistent behavior of unsubmissiveness and undermining of daddy and husband while not violating various passages regarding the maintaining of the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace?
So if a husband and wife, and I'm assuming here everybody's a professing Christian, they're going to church and that sort of thing, but there's active resistance, digging in the heels and whatnot. When I've counseled men in that position, I think that they need to do something else first before they sit down and have a heart-to-heart talk with their wife about what she is doing. And that is, I think, a sustained season of prayer, of confession on the husband's part, having let things get to this point, and have him going before the Lord privately in prayer, confessing the state of his family to the Lord. So instead of saying, "Oh, I went to a conference and I heard a talk, and babe, sit down. Here's what we're going to go over this." All you're going to do is get resistance. You're going to make it worse. It's not going to help. But you need to fix it, and the way you fix it is take responsibility. Remember, authority flows to those who take responsibility. It runs away from those who seek to evade responsibility. So I would encourage a man to start confessing the sin, the sinful state his family is in, to the Lord and to the Lord only, on a regular basis for weeks, months, and then add to it a request to the Lord to enable him to have the courage to go through the door when the door opens. But I think the door will open.
Along those lines, a different question, but along those same lines, can you describe the differences of a husband deciding to do something, considering his wife being patient and long-suffering, versus deciding to do the same thing but in an effeminate way, or being a coward?
So if basically the only way to test yourself to make sure you're not doing the effeminate capitulation every time is to make sure that there are occasions when you make the decision that you think is best and that your wife doesn't think is best. So you're going to have to have testing points. That's going to happen. And if you think, well, it all goes smoothly if I give way 100% of the time, that's abdication. That's the wrong thing. And so if you're just starting, let's say you've got 10 decisions to make, stand your ground on 2 of them. And keep your cool. Don't lose your temper. Don't let it turn into a bump or a friction or anything, but just decide and stick to it. And it could be as trivial as what restaurant to go to. It could be as a more significant decision. But out of the decisions you have to make, start at the shallow end and establish the principle that way.
And if you haven't been doing that sort of thing as a husband, it's going to be like going to the gym for the first time in decades. Right. The littlest of standing up and asserting yourself as a leader is going to feel like going to the gym for the first time. So.
And if I can tag one thing on, one time I was counseling a husband who had a porn problem, and when he started to get victory over the porn problem, it was really an odd twist because his wife didn't like it at all. Because when he had the porn problem, he was in the doghouse. And when he was in the doghouse, she could run the show. Or, you know, she could get her way more easily. When he started to be a stand-up Christian man, it didn't just fix the porn problem. It started to address other problems.
Yeah. Ben, a question for you. It seems as if our culture embraces effeminate fathers or empty uniform dads and leaders. Do you see this as a result of our fatherless generation and rejection of God the Father? And maybe elaborate on that if indeed you see that as the problem.
Well, yeah, I think it's not just the rejection of God the Father. It's the rebellion against. You know, if you rejected him, you would forget about him and move on. But there's his image is there in every family, in the fact that there's a father there, and I think that spurs an active, hostile rebellion. And I think that we've started to see, I think some of our cultural commentators sort of start to call this out a little bit. I think of Aaron Renn and the Masculinist and his just pointing out the way it's just almost impossible to have a strong father figure in any movie, sitcom, whatever, that isn't the joke or the constant butt of every joke. That's pointed. Like we're actually really rebelling against the order that God has given us and the testimony of the gospel that He's given us in the father figure.
Can you elaborate on, in your talk, you didn't necessarily split it into how should a father relate to his daughters and a father relate to his sons. Can you flesh that out maybe a little bit?
The distinction between father to son versus daughter?
Yeah,
I was conscious of the fact that I was cheating as I did that.
Well, that's what this is
I was
for.
hoping nobody would call me out on that. No, because I think my assignment was a man and his children, and most of the dynamic that I was describing there really had to do with a man and his sons. But I think that you can take a lot of what I was saying and flip it pretty quickly to daughters. Whereas I think sons, I'm just ripping off mostly stuff from Doug, so he can come in a second on this. But I think it's interesting the way men are called to the job and women are called to the man. And I think that you see that a lot in the way the kids are. The sons, you need to praise them for the things they're doing, and the girl, you need to love her. And it's a little bit more of a direct affection. I think that it surprises me how when my kids were little, it was unsurprising that my daughters always wanted to have a hug and be held and whatnot. It surprises me that when they're in their 20s, they still need that. They still, and I think that we start to pull back a little bit, but I think you need to be just consciously making sure they are completely saturated in it, that there's no looking around for affection because they are completely tanked up. But I do think it's a little bit different with the guys. Like I said, it's more about accomplishment. With the girls, it's more about just love and affection.
The one thing I would add to that is that notice that a father shouldn't be playing favorites between the kids. But if you have a healthy relationship of father and son, if there's a healthy male dynamic in the home, it's going to include the women. It's going to encompass them and help add to their security. But it doesn't go the other way. All right. If you win the men, you are making a place that's friendly to women. If you don't, you're losing everybody.
Dr. White, a question for you. In light of the long-standing cultural turmoil and uncertainty about the future of the United States, what does it look like for young men to prepare for the future, I think specifically vocationally? And should we go about business as usual? Are there adjustments that need to be made in light? Should you send your sons into the Army and the military? In this day and age, what are the these men that are raising young boys that are growing up in all this madness? How should they be training them up, and what should they be training them for?
Yeah, I've been commenting a lot that I do feel like I'm schizophrenic in the sense that I want to continue doing the things I've been doing in life. But then I realize what's going on around me, and I realize what the future could hold as far as some of those dynamics, and I realize that my normal life is not going to be able to continue in the future, but I want it to, and I'm still living that way, and no one's busting down my door yet. And the same thing when I have young men come up to me and they're looking at going into the ministry, and they want to know about seminaries and Bible colleges and things like that. And they mention some of the big box places that they could go to that will not only take them forever, but then indebt them for the rest of their lives in the process. And I'm just like, I just very honestly say to them, in light of what's going on around us, do you really believe that that's something that you can do, and that you're going to be able to, are you married? Are you not married? What are your plans in that area? There's so many different things that have to enter in that were a little bit simpler when you didn't have to worry about whether the government was going to step in and start making mandates as to whether your denomination is even going to be able to continue to meet or whatever else the situation might be. So obviously we do have to, I think, have a different mindset as we're making long-term plans. But at the same time, for me, the big thing is sowing the seed through this darkness into the next generations. And so there's going to be a need for solid, well-trained individuals in the future. And so especially young men, if they're thinking ministry things, you've still got to get those foundations underneath you. And doing that without necessarily abandoning your local church or things like that might be something definitely to be looking into. But especially as far as vocations go, there are certain, for example, my son-in-law has a job that he's concerned about mandates and things like that, but it's in a field that we will always need. Christian apologists, not so much. It doesn't quite have the same stick-to-itiveness as far as the government's concerned. So there are all sorts of practical applications that can be made, thinking about how can I be faithful to Christ? How can I? And I would just encourage people, how can you be a real servant in your local body? How can that community that we were talking about, that faithfulness to that church, how can you do that and do it in such a way that not only you provide for your family, but maybe open up ways of providing for the whole community as a whole. You're in a smaller context here. You've got more connectivity. We have how many? What's the population of Idaho?
Idaho, about a million, a little over a million.
A little over a million. So we have 5 million people in the valley in Phoenix, and so we are very spread out. We have people coming from, I've got a 35, 40-minute drive to church as it stands right now. And so that changes some of the dynamics. It's not quite as easy when people are much farther away to have that sense of community and really pull that way. So those are some of the challenges we're facing, is if we do have to start going to house meetings and things like that. How are we going to do that? Now, I heard somebody say recently that you should just put your foot down and say, we will never, ever, ever stop meeting for anything ever again. Have you ever heard anybody say anything like that? Yeah, like last week. But I'm talking.
I remember that.
I'm glad you still remember that. That's good. But I'm talking about under severe situations, right. Chinese type situations that we are thinking about. How you would handle ministry to your people and those types of contexts. And the people in the community, if they are thinking that way, then that combined wisdom can be a real advantage.
But I think the hustle in this moment, when all the world is sort of mailing it in, you can sit at home and take government paychecks. Hustle in this moment is going to be an incredibly valuable virtue to instill in your sons. When the rest of the world is shutting down and sitting at home, there's plenty of opportunity around us.
But I think there's a straightforward. There just needs to be. I said this to my grandson recently. I said, you have to respect yourself for the individual God has called you to be. And if all the people around you are sitting around mailing it in, getting their government fake money, that should not be good enough for you, because you're not respecting yourself. You're not respecting what you've been made by God to do. And you've got to stand up again, even if it's what everybody's doing, and so it looks really, really acceptable. That's not an option.
Yeah. Somebody asks along the lines of work, and this may be for all of you to chime in on, how should we think about the vaccine from a biblical perspective, especially in light of our call to be providers for our home and the danger of losing our job for refusing vaccination? And you could probably sub in vaccination there for signing off on the HR policies that your company passes that you have to say men are women, women are men, up is down.
So there's a difference between the HR policies, because if they make you confess something that's positively erroneous or blasphemous or wrong, you simply have to refuse, regardless of what the consequences are. On the vaccine, a lot of it hinges on your conscience and I'm against mandatory vaccines, and I think it's a liberty of conscience issue. But there are situations where someone, I think, could in good conscience take the vaccine as a cost-benefit risk analysis thing. Somebody else would be not in a position to take it at all. And I think we should cut, within the church, there are certain hard lines like fetal lines and those sorts of things. But I think that we should be modeling the kind of liberty of conscience, not just demanding liberty of conscience, but modeling it toward one another. And if someone said, I can't travel internationally, I've got, this is something I'm going to do, I've got to do your research and get the vaccine, you're not going to be excommunicated. We're not going to fight with you over that. But I think it's very important for all the people who have a voice to use the voice all at once. About 100 million Americans have not been vaccinated. About a third of us have not been vaccinated. And if we just if that's where it's stuck, they'd be stuck. Right? So if they're picking you off one at a time, they've got you. So, the borrower becomes the lender's slave. If I borrow $1,000 from somebody, he's got me. If I borrow $100 billion from him, then I've got him. Right? So it's the same way. Basically, if everybody says no at the same time, then, and that's the moment I'm praying for, that there would be that kind of preference cascade, that you would be able to do in concert what would be very hard to do individually.
So here's my question, Doug, in light of what you just said. When does the governmental mandates in regards to, because there's all sorts of specific issues regarding the safety of the vaccines and the efficacy of the vaccines, and there's all sorts of proper things that should be brought up and discussed, and we're not even being allowed to have meaningful data on those subjects and things like that. But it's becoming clear, I didn't show it to you, but I saw a graffiti from Germany that just showed up, and it said, "Gas the unvaccinated." In Germany. Talk about the irony. But there is becoming, there's this pushback taking place where vaccination is becoming the entry point into the appropriate relationship to the state and each other and everything else. When does that become offering a pinch of incense? When is it so disconnected from real medical issues, which I think in many ways it already is, but when does it get so much the demand of the state that then we have to go, I can't go there?
I don't think we're there yet, but I think we can see it from here. I think it's already become a highly symbolic, toxic political issue. And it's not so much about the medical efficacy at all, and it's more what side you're on. Right? And if the government mandated that we all wear a blue beanie.
Right.
And let's say that I had for years been wearing a blue beanie, but for some reason this ticked everybody off, and there were mobs manning the barricades refusing to put the beanie on. I'd take my beanie off
right.
and join them. I'd say this is a moment where there is at least the possibility of resistance. The state has been encroaching for decades, over and over and over again. And they're protesting hundreds of thousands strong in Europe, for crying out loud.
Has it come to that?
Yeah, it's come to that. We can't let the European show us up on something like that.
No kidding.
So I just think that this is, at some point, I think the particulars of the debate on the efficacy of the vaccine don't matter. What matters is what it means. And what it means is nanny state versus individual choice. That's what it's come down to. And I think we ought to take full advantage of the opportunity.
For you, Doug, on a... And the crowd goes wild. For you, Doug, on a man and his church, in rapid church growth, which our church has been experiencing, how do you combat losing track of congregants with a limited number of qualified elders? And I think we've seen that across our denomination in the CREC. Many churches have grown rapidly just by staying open. So how do you scale up your leadership, scale up your operation?
We're trying to fast track bringing new elders on. We're working hard on that. I'm working hard on just keeping, learning people's names and trying to remember where they're from and what they're doing. And so I think there's no way to accommodate it without the elders recognizing that we've got an all hands on deck situation. We need more hands on deck. We should recruit them, not be too fastidious about, I don't want to say too fastidious about elder qualifications because that's the Bible, but maybe not too fastidious about some of our spins or takes on elder qualifications, and just get good men in positions who are willing to pastor. We
used our deacons to stay in regular contact with, because we didn't shut down either, and so there's been a lot of growth, and so we use the deacons to keep in contact with people, and then that's obviously reported directly back to the elders to meet the needs there, and we're a very young congregation, so I mean there's I don't know how many meal trains are going at any one time, but I think we've set the world record as to how many you have going.
You're on.
Okay, yeah, we'll have a competition going on. Just with the number of babies and everything being born, it's just astonishing. But yeah, we bring the deacons in and utilize their skills as well.
Another thing is utilize electronic tools for keeping track of the saints. We use Church Community Builder, CCB. It helps us communicate with the saints, helps us maintain an online directory. We can keep track of elder visits, and it's just a big help. There are tools available now.
I'd say one other thing I'd throw in that is when it comes to the growth, I think that church government and church leadership, the tendency is usually to respond to it about 6 months too late. And I think you have to not wait to actually address the issues that are coming. I think we were in God's providence. We did a whole reorganization of our elder board right before the whole pandemic hit, and again, in God's providence, I think it set us up to handle that moment in a way that I don't think we could have before, and then it also set us up to handle rapid growth in a way I don't think we could have. But being way ahead of it made a big difference.
Which again comes back to just not sitting on your hands, being active as church elders, not waiting to respond. How should somebody ask? I'll let any of you answer this who would like to.
I think it should be changed.
How should we respond to elders who have masking mandates for our churches? Where I saw a church out in Atlanta is requiring vaccine passports.
I just showed it to Doug. Yeah.
To come worship the Lord. Your papers, please.
Yeah.
And then discipline, censure, or anyone who attends another church. And then discipline or censure anyone who attends another church until the mandate is over. How do you respond? So we talked about government, state government. What do we do with church government where it's clearly going wobbly, or how do you interface with that?
I honestly have not seen a sound Orthodox church doing those types of things. So there's almost always, when I see what that denomination is, what that church is, it's almost like, well, why would you want to be going there anyway, type of situation. But we are seeing that division taking place, and we knew before this all hit that a lot of those places were the way they are, but they were maintaining somewhat of an outward sense of orthodoxy. But now that they're actually getting to the point of demanding vaccine passports to enter in, I think that's sort of when you start getting into what we were just talking about. That's starting to be the offering of the pinch of incense on the altar.
But it's kind of exciting because they're learning how to do church discipline. You know? Like,
I would say their churches are being disciplined.
Well,
actually.
Yeah. But I
You
mean,
say
like,
tomato, I say tomato.
Yeah, but isn't it funny that they will not take a stand on anything else, but you're going to take that vaccine.
Had they ever fenced the table before that moment?
Exactly, right.
But it does show you whether they fear God or man. I mean, do you fear God or man? If you were practicing biblical church discipline, then I could maybe think that, okay, you have a hypersensitive conscience. But it's like you ignore all of that, and then you freak out at the fear of the state doing something to you. You're not fearing God, you're fearing man.
Yeah, exactly.
Or some of them are just, look, the panic that has been induced over the past 18 months is real in many people's minds. At first, it was just like, oh, there goes another Karen, you know. But when you think about some of these people, the fear that they have lived in for so many months now, they have been changed for the rest of their lives. And have any of you tried to reason with them? It doesn't work. Panic absolutely short circuits the reasoning system of the mind. And you can bring all the facts to bear you want, and they will not listen. So I feel for folks like that, and if that's the majority of your congregation, that's probably going to end up being reflected in leadership too. But that, in my experience, has been like the United Methodists or the crazy lady from Canada. I just did a thing on her. She decided that the Great Commission. Did you see this?
No, I just think with crazy lady from Canada, you're going to have to be more specific. You're going to have to narrow this down.
You're going to narrow it down a little bit. Okay, the crazy lady from Canada in the backwards collar with the rainbow cowl with the fancy flowers, who decided that the Great Commission was added around the time of the Council of Nicaea, and is the primary source of white supremacy and colonization, and therefore we should never call this the gospel again. That's that kind of church. I can fully understand why they have vaccine passports. And in fact, I'd encourage it for them.
That's right.
Now you're going to have to look it up. Now you're sitting there going, I want to see
curious.
this. Yeah,
I need to write about this.
that's right.
One final question here. In all this, how do we continue to do our jobs under the Lord with this person's asked with a smile on my face when I'm physically tired and in pain? But let me expand that to when we look at the moment we're in. It's discouraging in many respects. You know, some people might say this isn't the America I grew up in. How do you soldier on? How do you continue to maintain the joy of the Lord?
Recognize the America you grew up in was the odd thing. Most of human history has been really tough, right? For most people all over the globe, all the time. 95% of it has just been a hard grind. And we were extraordinarily blessed in the generation that's in our rearview mirror. Extraordinarily blessed. And we wadded it up and threw it away.
Yep.
So ain't no one to blame but ourselves on that one. And so just recognize that we're just, I would say something like welcome to Earth, kid.
When I am tempted in this way, and I am, I'm especially tempted when I think about my grandchildren and what they're going to be facing. That's what makes things really serious for me. And when I think about that, I cannot help but think of that incident in the hiding place. I'm so glad I did get to visit. Ever visited Amsterdam and Holland? I forget which city it was. Anyways, where the...
I've been to the airport.
You've been to the airport. Okay, good. But I put my head inside the hiding place, and I've walked up those stairs in that. And if you've not read The Hiding Place, you're really missing something. But it's the story of the 10 Booms during World War II. And the sisters were in Ravensbrück concentration camp. And they were put in this horrible, horrible dormitory that was filled with fleas. Everything was infested with fleas. And Betsy, the sister who passed away, had always said, in all things, give thanks to the Lord. And so she stops to pray and give thanks for them being put in this place that is infested with fleas. And what ended up happening was they ended up being able to have Bible studies with the inmates because it was the only dormitory the guards would not go into because of the fleas. And it took time for her to see this. But the point was, by being obedient to that command and seeking that joy, they experienced things that no one else could ever experience. So we've been given that opportunity, and the question is whether we'll avail ourselves of it or not. And so Christ is still on his throne, and we have it better than most of the humanity has ever had. And every time I start feeling depressed, I just start thinking about 1347. 1347. You don't remember 1347? 1347 to 1351. Over half of Europe died. That was a real plague. Okay, that was the real one. I mean, that's where you could get. There were forms of the plague that you could get that killed you in 12 hours. 12 hours. They thought you even passed it by looking at people because it was so fast. And can you imagine? In some cities, it was over 70%. In this countryside, maybe 33 in some places. But can you imagine what it was like back then, and yet all the good things that hadn't happened yet? So that's the thing to keep in mind, is that we've still got it really, really good. The Lord's still really good to us, and everything we've got we didn't deserve in the first place. So be joyful.
And whatever's coming 5 years from now, let's say you paint it pretty dark. We were made for that hour.
That's right. His grace is sufficient.
I think it's one of the things that's interesting to look at, like the various plagues of the 14th century and the 16th century, because one of the things you learn when you read your history is it's like, in the Marine Corps, they always said you run towards the sound of fire. But in church history, the Christians always ran towards the plague. It was the Christians that went in. I remember, worshiping at a church in England, and as well as also some of the characters in my dissertation and reading about their names on these plaques or these names and these stories. And there are these great ministers who had incredible, congregations, a huge writing ministry, and many of them died in the plague because they heard the plague was over there, and it's their job to go and minister to the plague. And that's what the faith is for.
And in regards to church, Calvin loved that French congregation in Strasbourg so much that when the plague hit, he did not flee. He stayed and he ministered, and I think he got sick, if I recall correctly, but recovered. But he didn't run because he loved that congregation so much.
Amen. We'll give these gentlemen another hand of applause.